A lot of chairs to fill here.
I know. I had some last minute cancellations.
I see.
I'll start.
Well,
Yeah.
I can talk for a long time.
Well, I was going to say,
We have another song.
Yeah, I got another song too.
Oh, wait a second.
yeah, there, come on up.
I know this Volk guy, and
I
I'm gonna sit beside him. If he
I
gets
had-
rowdy, I'm gonna put him out.
can you hear me? I had a request here for another song. This one goes back to 1949. The first one went to World War I. This one is Maresy Dotes and Dotsy Dotes and Little Lambsy Davy, a kittle davy too, wouldn't you? A kittle davy too, wouldn't you? If the words sound queer and funny to your ear, a little bit jumble and jivey, but mares eat oats and does eat oats and little lambs eat ivy. Oh, mares eat oats and does eat oats and little lambs eat ivy, a kittle eat ivy too, wouldn't you?
Hey, John, take the floor here.
First, I'd like to thank all the guys up here and anybody else that stops up to help us try to reminisce about the time you guys worked at the plant out here in Charles City. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. We will, after they get done talking, think they're done, we'll start asking them some questions. So we got the microphone, pass it around. McKenna, we'll be asking our questions. If you want to ask questions, we'll ask you to write it down and she will ask questions for us. Okay? Thank you.
We have paper in a basket here for you, those of you who want to write your
Yeah,
questions.
you guys just raise your hand and we'll get you the paper.
Yeah.
Just
Or if you don't want to write it down. I
to
can
follow
just
up with John, my name's Dean Jaden. I'm very active with the Floyd County Historical Society. I work with McKenna here quite a bit. And then I'm also involved in the HPOCA organization. And John had contacted me here, I don't know, when was it, a couple, 3 months ago, and said, we'd sure like to have a forum, and we know you worked at the plant, and is there any way you could get some of the guys together and have a forum that would be filmed and be on YouTube? Well, this is where it's evolved to. Every one of these gentlemen, except the gentleman on the far left, I had some relationship with. Either I worked for them or with them. I had an excellent experience at the plant. I was bounced from department to department to department. I don't know if it was because I did such a poor job and they wanted to just shove me on, or but I started out with Max here. But with that, I'll turn it over to the forum here, and I'll contribute when I see fit. But to kick it off, go ahead, Max. So.
I'm supposed to talk now?
Well, no more singing.
I was thinking
But just
about it.
give us a little bit of history on how you started with the plant and what,
Well,
and the highs and the lows.
I worked at the plant up here, first as the Oliver Corporation, and then it changed to Oliver Corporation.
Microphone.
Oh, so I can hear you. Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Anyway, I started with the Oliver Corporation in 1955, all in the service department. And would you believe I had just finished up a year at Iowa State, and I was looking for a job because I was going to get married on the 26th of June. And so I went over to the personnel office there and said, I understand you're hiring. And I said, what experience have you had? I says, none. I raised on a farm. And then he saw my application where I'd been at Iowa State. So they sent me up to Herb Stokes, who was the service manager, plant service manager that time, and I'll be darned if he didn't hire me and wanted me to start the next day. And I said, geez, can you put that off a little bit? I'm getting married. I'm going to go on a honeymoon for. So he said, yep, we'll take care of it. So I started there and writing credits and debits to the there was something like 12 Oliver branches at that time. And each was operated like a separate business. And if there was a program, say, that we screwed up on something and sold, the tractors were sold, and then a warranty claim would come in, and they handled all the warranty at the branches. But then they were reimbursed by our department there at Charles City. And when they reimbursed them, they had to get a credit memo out, and I was in charge of doing that. And also worked in the publications area some bit. And one thing had led to another. People would quit, or people would get a better job. Some of the people we had in the department were there temporarily. Oliver was known for laying off people and hiring back for years there. And some of these people were supervisors in the plant. They didn't want to lay them off, so they dumped them on the service department to do things there, like write operators' manuals and everything. Not everybody was fit to do that, but we did have some that did that. So anyway, I worked my way up into a technical writer, and then I was publications manager, and then I was assistant service manager, plant service manager, and then they came in with a bunch of people to straighten the department out. They didn't like it was run, and so I stayed there as assistant service manager for about 2 or 3 years, and then the service manager moved on, and then I ended up being plant service manager. And eventually they changed the organization, and we had central warranty and a bunch of other things, and I was involved with those, and so we ended up being general service manager of the entire product line. Later it was everything from chainsaws to Jacobson lawn tractors, and the new rotary combine we had that was really a good thing. And anyway, I ended up general service manager. There'll be questions later?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure I could match Max's experience, but I had gone to Iowa State after my Army experience, and I got my master's, and on a whim, I went up to Charles City because I'd heard they were looking for jobs in their engineering department, and I talked to the chief engineer, Ed Ketterling, and at the time he was telling me that they were going to move the engineering from Hopkins to Charles City, and this would have been in 1971 or so. And I thought, well, that sounds good, because at the time I thought that was a nice Iowa location. But by the time I started working for them, they had changed their mind, and the engineering was in Hopkins. My first day, I was late getting to work because I was driving up from Ames to Minneapolis, and things came up. So I was about 6 hours late, and I was assigned to leave on, and his project was putting the 585 engine into the Oliver drivetrain, the over-under and the 6-speed transmission. So I worked with Levon to get those tractors online. The other fellow that joined me that day was Gary Bohall, and he was assigned to Mark Sickman, who was the project engineer for the articulated tractor, the 4150. And they had the V8 Caterpillar engine that went into that tractor. Gary stayed with White until I think they moved the engineering to Libertyville, Chicago area, and then he then went to work for Steiger, and I stayed in touch with Gary and over the years, and I think the last couple of years ago, on one of his Christmas cards, he sent me a nice picture of a 4150 that he has restored into brand-new condition. And so if you have any questions about those articulated tractors, get a hold of Gary Bohall or me, and I'll make sure you get that information straight. You know, Max alluded to the fact that the plant had its ups and downs and was hiring and laying off periodically, and that was pretty much the story of my career with White Farm also. But I have to look back and say it was definitely the best working experience, the best people that I've ever worked with, and I look back on it with really fond memories. It was a really nice place. Hi, Ray. Glad you joined us.
Yeah, glad to be here. There aren't many of us left.
No. Ray Hendricks and I go back a long way. Back in the fall of 1962, we had our first ag engineering class meeting. We were both freshmen, and I sat next to Ray Hendricks. And I think we finished that class, and then I think Ray may have changed majors or whatever, but we didn't see each other in any classes after that, but we'd nod each other and say hi as we'd pass each other on the sidewalk on campus. And finally, when I moved back to Charles City area, I started working with Ray again, and it's still a great experience. So, your turn, Ray.
What we're doing, Ray, is just giving a little biopsy or a history of our career with Oliver White Farm, why we came there, and some of the good times and bad times. I guess it's kind of an introductory thing.
Well, I don't know, I found my part there to be very interesting and a lot of fun. Like I say, John and I go back to 1962 in mechanical drafting class together, in fact.
Can you hear him? Okay.
Can you?
No?
I worked for Max after I got out of the Air Force. And I was in the service department, started out as a tech writer. And after, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, one of the guys quit and a tech service rep, which is the job I really wanted. And one of them quit and went to work for, I believe, White Construction Equipment. And so I got promoted to tech service rep from there, and worked with Bill Buckendahl on the introduction of the closed center hydraulic system. And Bill and I worked together for a few years. I don't remember exactly how long he was there, but he bought a dealership out in Nebraska. He was originally from Nebraska, and he went back home again, bought a dealership. And, you know, is Bill still out there, Max? Have you heard from him lately?
Max?
Max.
What's that?
Have you heard from Bill lately?
Duck and
He's
dog.
dead. He died.
Is he still alive?
No, he had Alzheimer's and passed away.
Oh, my, how long?
I communicate with his wife every year.
Uh-huh. That's too bad. Bill was a guy that, I remember when we were working up the troubleshooting procedures for the closed center hydraulic system, we broke something, I don't remember what it was. And the thing I remember most about Bill is he says, well, education costs money no matter how you get it. And, I've had that happen to me several times since then. But Bill was a very knowledgeable guy, very dedicated to Oliver. He bought an Oliver dealership. One time he told me he had over 100 people working for him in his dealership. I don't know how many, do you know how many towns he was located in, Max? To have that many dealerships?
I gotta say something once more. My success at Oliver was because of Larry Jaden, this fellow here, Hendricks, Dean Jaden. I had a lot of good people working for me. I didn't have that college education that they did, but somehow I got through it, and because of these people.
Max is one of the most honest guys I ever worked for. I had one other guy that came close to that, a Caterpillar, and that was just a few years ago, and he told me one time, he says, you know, coming to work just isn't fun anymore. And I agreed with him 100%. too many people in the business today that don't know what they're doing, and everything is about value engineering instead of making things last a long time, which is what we did when we worked for Max. We went out and investigated the problems and brought up the recommendation for a solution back to engineering. Engineering kind of thought we were a bunch of nuisances, I guess, probably. But some of them were happy to hear from us, and they had a genuine desire to make the product better. And I was there for the introduction of the 55 series tractors. 1855 was kind of the beginnings of value engineering. And they had their problems. Most of them were fixed by coming out with an oil cooler, engine oil cooler, which the 1950T had from the very beginning. It's probably one of the best tractors Oliver ever made. And the 1855 engine was a value engineered value engineered version of that. And we went out and looked at a few of them that had a hole in the side of the crankcase. But there's still some of them engines running good in the 1800s though. Just a matter of how hard you worked them, I guess.
I can explain that hole in the engine.
You can?
Yeah, one of my projects was brought to our attention through the service department was that people were really fond of their 1855s, and they thought, you know, I really should have that engine overhauled. And they'd take it into the shop and they would completely overhaul it, and sometimes driving the tractor on the way home, you would throw a rod right through the engine block. And so after some evaluation and looking it over, we realized that the source of the rod cap screws had been changed, and they had found a more economical, more readily available cap screw that had a larger radius between the head and the shaft of the screw. Now, the mechanics would torque these cap screws down with the specified torque, but it was riding on the edge of that radius in the fillet of the cap screw, which didn't take too many cycles, and it would wear, and then the rod cap was loose. The loose rod went right through the engine block. So we solved that problem simply by specifying and making sure that we bought the right rod cap screws, and that seemed to solve the problem. But I really felt sorry for the guys that were so proud of their tractor that they went and spent the money to have it fixed and have it blow up on them like that. So that's why there was holes in those engines you mentioned.
Okay. I didn't know, I never heard that story.
I must not have been there that day. I don't remember that.
We kept it kind of quiet.
Nowadays, I'll tell you that. So anyway, after the closed center hydraulics and the 55 series tractor program, which meant got an all new fuel tank and several changes to the hydraulic lines, and I remember Ed Kellerling saying, you know, we never had a problem with that tractor that would not have been discovered if we had just had more test time. And he was probably right. It was before the days of CAD/CAM and computer to assembly line, and we did have a pretty extensive test department and test program, including running tractors in the hands of customers down at Phoenix and at the proving ground down in Arizona. But of course, management was always anxious to start making money on the new products. And we had to release them before many times people were ready. Now it seems to be the order of the day. Every 2 weeks I get an update for my computer programs, and after every one, something doesn't work right anymore. I guess that's part of living in the 21st century. So then, well, let's see, White Motor started, of course, the 55 series was still green, but they had a little white sticker on the hood. It said white up in the front before the Oliver. And I went to lots of customers back in those days when I worked for Max, and one of them says, you know, ever since that little white thing showed up in front there, this don't seem to be as good as it used to be. And I've told several people that, I think Bunky Knudsen only proved one thing, and that is Ford and GMC knew what they were doing when they passed him over for promotion to chairman of the board. Because he's probably, in my opinion, has been the worst thing that ever happened to the company. But he wanted to move white service department and everything to Hopkins, Minnesota, combine it with Minneapolis, Moline. I just started building a new house, didn't want to abandon that. Wasn't much more to it but the basement and the subfloor at that time, so I decided I probably didn't want to go to living in the Twin Cities. And so I left Max and the gang down there and went to work with John then in engineering for Gordy Boskeljohn and Ed Gleason. And I think Gordy Boskeljohn's one of his kids must still be in town here. I see some things probably on Facebook once in a while.
I didn't realize that.
Bill
Yeah, I didn't even
Boskeljohn.
know yet, pardon?
It's Bill Boskeljohn.
Yeah, I didn't even know Gordy had any kids. Never
Oh, you had a big bunch.
I remember they were tall, they played basketball.
Oh, yeah, they were. Well, Gordy was pretty tall.
Yeah.
So they came by that naturally enough, yeah. And worked as a liaison engineer for a couple of years and with in the engineering group, 4 guys, John and myself and Ed Gleason and Gordy Boskeljohn, and then there was another guy that joined us from Osage later. I can't remember his name.
Oh,
We'll think about
yeah.
it for a while.
Wouldn't be Dean Barker.
No.
Then the service department never did leave Charles City. Well, yeah, they did, later.
93.
They didn't move to Hopkins, they stayed for a
No.
while.
The last time was to Coldwater, Ohio.
Yeah.
Well, they went I didn't even know they went to Coldwater. I knew they were in Libertyville.
Well, not many of us went.
Yeah,
Libertyville back to Charles City, and then Charles City to Coldwater. Wasn't that how it went, Max?
yeah, I think that's right. That was, yeah, they were in Coldwater after I got another job working for Trimark. So, anyway, I went back to the service department for a while, and then I guess they decided to move to Libertyville. Then I went back to working with the engineering liaison group, and a guy by the name of Jerry Brand, who made all the experimental parts that were fabricated in the factory or in local machine shops for the new tractors, passed away. And I got his job, and that was a very interesting job, being the first one to make the parts for all the new tractors. I spent a lot of time sitting across the desk from a guy by the name of Dick Bennett, listening to him. He was a metallurgist, one of the smartest guys that I think ever worked in the factory, as far as I was concerned. But he was very opinionated, and he chewed butt from everybody that was above him or got into the higher levels of management in the Oliver plant. And he just was kind of merciful when it come to their stupidity. And some of them kind of deserved it, I think. And I used to think if he'd have just learned to keep his mouth shut, he could have been plant manager. But he didn't. He had honesty. He just had to be true to himself. But he was really a smart guy, and he knew all about what happened to a piece of iron when you heat it up red hot and stick it in cold water or oil or whatever. Plus all those little alloys people put in with the steel to make it stronger. And so that was a good job. But one day in March, I think it was March or April of 1985, they laid off the entire engineering department except for 2 guys. Oh, one other thing I got to do before that, I got to take 2 tractors to the infamous Nebraska test. That was kind of a farm boy's dream come true to participate in that. It was kind of boring after you got out there. I heard all about it anyway, and it was a very interesting experience. And of course, Nebraska test has gone by the wayside now. They don't even conduct it anymore. We used to have all of our salespeople said that Nebraska test was only good for two things. One, it proves there's a state of Nebraska, and the other is that a tractor was there and was tested. And I guess somebody at the state government of Nebraska decided that was probably true, and they discontinued that. But it was the kind of the Bible of all tractors, if you had to want to be sold in Nebraska, had to be run there around the test track. So then in '85, they laid off the entire engineering department. And I didn't think that people who managed a company and did something like that were probably going to be very successful. So I got another job selling door latches to Caterpillar, Case, and John Deere, and everybody who was in the construction industry, farm machinery business. Made a lot of friends there. Then I made the same mistake Dick Bennett made. I got myself fired. But my best customer hired me, so I guess, anything else you want to hear?
No, it's
You
interesting.
get another chance.
Yeah, you'll,
Hey, I didn't fall asleep.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
You know, Johnny, that's Johnny over there. He's a welder. And, anyway, he's got more hair than I got. And he's older. And that makes me mad. So if the shine is too great, I will wear this hat. All right?
We'll let you know.
All right. All right, I started in 1962, young kid out of high school. I had worked, it was in the fall of '62, and I started out on the assembly line. And since I was kind of green and whatever, and pretty good size, I got the heavy job. I had to put the front ends on. And it was very labor intense, and I had to be real quick, and I finally got pretty fast, but we had a big problem. The problem was that there was a lot of guys, young guys on there at that time, and they had some shenanigans going on. It was greasing and your hammer and all that kind of stuff. So just to put a little humor in this, we had a guy named Schmitty, which I think he's passed by now, so I can talk about him. He would grease and Permatex our hammers and whatever. We had a guy that was building up the bolsters. He was from Austin, Minnesota. And before he went home, why, Schmitty went over there and he greased up his sleeve in his coat. Well, I saw him do it, so I told on him. Anyway, because I was sick of it myself, I had a hell of a time keeping up. I was green as grass, and I started to get handy later on. But anyway, so Schmitty lived just across the street, so he went home for lunch. And so this kid, he put Permatex on top of Schmitty's hat. Schmitty was bald, and he went to the restroom to wash up, and then he used to come in, put his hat on and whatever. And the Permatex dripped right down his nose on his hand, and he never come back, and I had to take care of his unit too. Oh God! We had a little, you know, we got a kind of ahead, but you know, by the next day we were really far behind and had to work hard to catch up. But that's just one of the jobs my first job was. And then we started making 550s, which was, I had a center frame that I had to put in with the clutch and all that kind of stuff, and it was heavy. And we had to do them at 98 a day. And that was all, I'll tell you, it was assholes and elbows. And it was tough. And then it evidently wasn't fast enough, because years later it was 105 a day. So, and the same job. But I got laid off that fall, or that spring, I think it was that spring. And I did another job and I thought that I was gonna go to the Navy,